In 2012, amidst a backdrop of banker bashing, the IMF revisited the proposals of a group of economists led by Irving Fisher to solve the Great Depression. Their conclusion was that Fisher's plan would have worked. Today we explore this concept, and while it is no gold standard, it is a dramatic improvement on our current monetary framework. So let's dive on in. Now, this channel provides global macro insights for informed investing, so do consider subscribing. Now, I believe that this is the most important video I've filmed to date and offers us a little known alternative pathway out of this potential depression that we face. So please do share this far and wide. This is the first in a little mini series looking at means by which a monetary reset can actually occur. So Irving Fisher's fabulous Chicago plan, which was offered as a solution to the Great Depression, has received the backing of top IMF economists, noting that it would have worked then. The principle is rooted upon a similar approach adopted by the Athenian leader Solon in 599 BC. So while this plan would have succeeded in solving the Great Depression, the corrupt FDR sided with bailing out the Fed and the banking cartel, as we've discussed previously. Now, why did the Great Depression endure for so long? Well, it comes down to a principle which has become regarded as Fisher's paradox. This occurs where the repayment of a large private debt overhang becomes the primary focus of the private sector. But in repaying debt, the velocity of money circulation is reduced, which further reduces economic growth, and the contraction worsens. The focus on repayment of debt rather than the use of it for consumptive means reduces credit. We can see this paradox clearly in this chart from the interview Professor Steve Keen ran on Real Vision, links in the description. What's clear is that this paradox has occurred a number of times, most notably in the early 1930s and from 2008 to 2010. During both periods, credit went into reversal and private debt soared as a percentage of GDP. As the economy contracts, private debt levels, even when being repaid, soar. Consequently, we must ensure we do not fall foul of this paradox right now. The potential consequence is a negative feedback loop which leads to an ever greater deterioration in the economy. And so what is this great Chicago plan and how does it help? Well, the key principle is to move away from fractional reserve banking to full 100% bank coverage for all funds that banks lend. Currently, banks may hold around, say, 10% reserves for all loans that they actually make. As banks create 97% of all new credit, this creates enormous growth of the money supply and thereby the debt cycle, driving booms and busts and enormous asset price inflation, as we've seen with housing markets and the financial assets. But the Chicago plan would reduce public and private debt levels while at the same time seeking to avoid the negative consequences of too much printing of new currency that we're all so familiar with given the experiences in the Weimar Republic, Zimbabwe and Venezuela. Now, the authors of this paper and their version of Fisher's plan essentially works as an asset swap, a debt for equity swap, where banks on one hand receive interest-free money from the government. In return, a percentage of public and private debt is cancelled. In fact, the IMF paper concluded by indicating that up to $15 trillion of US public and private debt could actually be written off. This could include private debts such as credit cards, student debts, loans, mortgages and car loans as examples. Meanwhile, a provision would need to be offered to ensure that frugal savers are not punished by such a system. Of course, the private creation of currency creates a liability. A Federal Reserve note produces a claim upon the Federal Reserve Bank. Meanwhile, new bank credit creation via a mortgage or other bank lending is the bank's asset but becomes your liability in its repayment. Instead, publicly created money is regarded as a portion of equity in the Commonwealth and not a debt for the government, as it never needs to be repaid. This is a really important concept to understand within this Chicago plan, that publicly created money does not create a liability. And so in using the author's slides, we can understand how this mechanism could work via the balance sheets of the banking system as we currently see them. Here we can see the traditional banking system balance sheet, and these numbers, as stated, represent the percentages in US GDP at the time of publication. In this second slide, we can see the transition to the Chicago plan sees the Treasury credit, the public money, represent 100% reserve cover. A credit liability, but the bank assets are a clear asset for the bank. In the next slide, the plan splits banks into money banks and investment trusts. For the money banks, the customer deposits are equal to the bank reserves. And this ensures that there will never be a run on the banking sector. Meanwhile, the investment trust receives Treasury credit and can undertake lending as necessary. Expanding the Treasury credit can then enable more bank lending via the investment trusts to take place. This next slide shows how the debt reduction can take place via the cancellation of a portion of public debt via government bonds and the write-off of the equal amount of Treasury credit. Of course, this can be extended to private debt. The next slide shows how the balance sheet has been reduced in size to 180 from 200% of GDP. On our next slide, we can see that the Treasury credit can be split according to the debts that wish to be written off as part of this debt equity swap. Now we have 100% citizens' accounts to write down the short-term and mortgage loans. This further reduces the size of the investment trust balance sheet. In addition to this, producing new money is highly profitable, particularly when done so digitally at near zero cost. A seniorage revenue is generated for the government. Some of this windfall could be used to pay a dividend to small and medium-sized businesses hit by the recent crisis, or to reward frugal savers. So Fisher's plan offers a number of key advantages, which include, first, that banks would become true intermediaries. No longer could they drive credit creation and abuse their banking licenses for private access. They would need to increase their bank equity or receive new Treasury credit to be able to actually create new lending. Second, that 100% reserve banking requirements would eliminate bank runs. Of course, this was of great importance during the Great Depression. Third, the fact that the private sector no longer drives credit creation would lead to a more balanced economy without such vast booms and busts. Fourth, a drastic reduction in public and private debt could take place. Fifth, an environment with a lot less debt would reduce the interest rate risk premium, which can help boost productive lending and investment. Sixth, low inflation or even no inflation could be allowed to take place, as money supply growth could take place in line with GDP growth. Seventh, and I think this one is huge, it actually could remove the need for our tyrannical central banks. Is it perfect? No, it does not offer the deflationary benefits of a true gold standard and enables politicians to abuse their newfound money creation power, but it does mean they could at least be held accountable to a clearly defined monetary rule when it comes down to how much new credit is injected into the economy. In addition, because governments are providing Treasury credit, they have substantial control over the money supply and could potentially influence interest rates, the time value of money. Ideally, this interest rate should be set by the market. And so in the 1930s, the bankers and FDR colluded to stop the Chicago plan. After the last financial crisis, bankers received a real bashing. Will they be blamed today? Well, only if a banking crisis takes off. This then offers us the potential for a real solution and a proper reset of the whole entire monetary system. It works in favour of the people, it works in favour of the government, and it works against the banking sector. What do you think? I'd love to hear your comments. If you want to find out more about the Chicago Plan, I've attached the links that I've used in my research. Thanks for watching. Please share this video. Do consider subscribing, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye bye.